rich countries got rich and why poor countries stay poor. If you think about that for 10 seconds and you had to come up with a reason or a number of reasons why rich countries stay rich and poor countries stay poor, what would those reasons be? According to Erik, Reinert, the writer of this book, his answer is very simple. Advanced manufacturing. He puts forward a view that the reason why rich countries are rich and poor countries are poor is that rich countries have industry, and those industries are involved in making advanced products. So unlike in countries which export fruit, such as bananas, oranges, those kinds of activity, in his view, are fundamentally, qualitatively different to economic activities which take raw materials and convert them into much more complex products that people need, and products that can constantly be improved and updated. He makes a distinction between two types of economic activity. The first is subject to the law of diminishing returns, and the other is subject to increasing returns. And if a country is to end up rich, like this one at the top of the book cover, it has to be engaged in economic activities which have increasing returns. So this would involve, in modern economics, jobs in the IT industry, in software engineering, because these are products which can constantly be made better. They're in a state of evolution. They can constantly be improved by people upskilling, improving what they do, and these are products which are constantly improving, and that there will be a need for and a demand for in the future, and that if you put a certain amount of energy into producing them, what you get back is constantly increasing, because the things that you're producing are constantly improving. Going to the computer industry, AI is obviously a growing industry, and that there will be many purposes and applications which are driven by developments in AI. Conversely, economic activities which are subject to diminishing returns, take for example a farm, for example in Central Africa, a country or an economy that is based on agriculture. If they converted the entire country to fields and farms for growing fruit, there isn't really a way to improve a banana, for example. There is only a certain quality of banana that can be produced, so there are limits on what these activities can yield, because they're limited by the technology being used. The other thing is that if a country puts more energy into growing coffee or growing fruits, the more it produces, the less money it will get, because the more you produce of something, the more abundant it is, the lower the price of those particular commodities. And so these kinds of products are not going to make a country rich, in the author's view. He's very critical of the economic model which is currently in fashion in the world today, in that he criticises free trade, in that it doesn't give, or the current way it's practiced, doesn't give poorer countries the opportunity to industrialise and to become advanced manufacturing nations. In that, in his view, because the theory of Adam Smith, or at least the interpretation of Adam Smith's theory, is the one currently being practiced, that is specialisation. In his view, countries are specialising in producing things which ultimately limits the growth potential of a country, so they can't really get beyond a certain stage of development, and that it's only through manufacturing that a country can go from an agricultural society to one that is able to have a democracy and to have more of a rule-based system, and have the things which the Western world has developed over a long period of time. And so he goes into this in quite some detail in the book. I have to say I found a lot of his arguments quite persuasive, because he does give historical accounts of countries that have gone through this process, countries that have industrialised. So for example, if you take Taiwan today, not so long ago, before it, or rather its government, invested heavily into chip manufacturing and the technology industry, it was a very poor country. But now it's a very wealthy country, and it's increasing all of the time, because what it's producing has increasing rates of return. Those chips are constantly getting better. They're going to fuel and help the development of other industries in Taiwan that are going to benefit from technological improvements. The same thing in Japan. Japan is a very wealthy country today because it's a very technologically advanced country, and he goes into this. This is a direct consequence of the Marshall Plan. So at the end of the Second World War, the United States reindustrialized Germany as well for the same reason, in that at the time there was some debate, because some thought it was dangerous to allow Germany to reindustrialize, because that was seen as one of the reasons what caused the First and Second World War, is that Germany becoming more economically powerful would create potential problems in the future in terms of the stability of Europe. So there was some debate at the end of the Second World War about whether or not Germany should be given loans through the Marshall Plan to reindustrialize. The same thing with Japan and other East Asian countries as well. And in the book and online, he's given some talks. He talks about how this was a plan of the United States, because they wanted strong countries next to communist countries to be a kind of a hindrance to the growth and to the spread of communism. So they wanted Japan to be strong, Taiwan to be strong. South Korea is another good example of how the States has heavily invested huge resources and protectionist policies. He's advocating for protectionism, so a country in his view should protect its budding technological industries, and even lose money to start with, to reach a level of development where they become competitive. And if you look at all of the aforementioned countries, you can see how wealthy they are today. And of course China is the largest exporting nation in the world, produces lots of advanced goods, and is a very wealthy country. And it wasn't so long ago that China was very, very poor, and starvation was an issue. In living memory, people's grandparents lived in very poor conditions. So I was quite surprised at the simplicity of the answer he puts forward in the book, because before reading it, I thought he was going to mention institutions, the importance of institutions, the importance of education, cultural development, but none of that came up in the book. He literally breaks it down and he says, no, it's only advanced manufacturing that actually enables a country to become rich and to stay rich. So it's a great book to read. It's quite persuasive. He does advocate Keynesian economics, so he does see a role for the state, and the state has a key role in protecting manufacturing from other countries which might produce certain goods cheaper and better quality. But he says that you should protect those companies until they're mature, until they're able to produce the same goods. And so he therefore advocates Keynesian financing of growth and employment. This is where he's coming from. So it's a fascinating read, purely because he breaks it down into law of increasing returns, law of diminishing returns. And the book is useful because you can apply the same logic to an individual. If an individual is involved in a job, if he or she has a job where he can't really improve at doing a particular thing, a classic example might be somebody stacking shelves in a supermarket. They can't really get better at doing that, and no matter how many hours they put into that, they're not going to get a bigger output. On the other hand, somebody who is involved in software engineering, or even, to take another example, a creative person, a writer, a creative writer, a writer of fiction. Okay, in this particular case, they need some talent to be there, possibly. But it's an activity where they can constantly get better at. They can become more efficient over time, over 10, 20, 30 years, over the course of their life. They can become an expert in that particular thing, and specialise in producing something that requires a very high level and an infinite level of skill. There's no limit on advanced manufacturing type jobs, because technology is constantly in a state of improvement, and it's not capped, it's constant. And so if you're interested, my only criticism of the book would be that it is quite repetitive on the points of increasing returns and diminishing returns. He does constantly make the points, but in slightly different ways. But it is a great book because it's hard to disagree. It's hard to say, well, actually, this theory is flawed. Because if you look at the United States, for example, in 1776, one of the reasons why the Americans were unhappy being a colony of Britain, was that Britain wasn't allowing the United States industry, it wasn't allowing the colonies to build factories and to produce goods, because obviously the British saw that as a potential competition. So Britain was just taking raw products back to Britain, raw commodities, taking them to Britain, and in the factories of Lancashire, Manchester, and other parts of England and the UK, we had factories, and we were turning all of that low information or low complexity, simple commodities, and producing complicated things. And that was one of the key issues in the conflict, was that the United States wanted to develop its own mills, wind mills, water mills, and factories for producing textiles, producing things that could be bought and sold around the world, and traded for other goods with other parts of the world. And so this was a key reason behind that conflict. And the United States, incredibly advanced manufacturing, Silicon Valley, what they've been producing with various tech companies, is one of the reasons why the United States is an incredibly wealthy country. It's because they have high tech. And thinking about the UK, there's a general election taking place at the moment, and I don't think any of the parties have mentioned industrial policy, industrial strategy. It's something that the political parties in the UK not really talking about, but would be good if we could have a much more deeper and more prescient understanding of this particular thing, because I have to say, it seems to me to be kind of obvious that the country needs to be producing highly advanced products at the frontier of technological innovation in order for it to continue to be rich. So check out the book, check out videos. He's given a number of talks which you can watch on Google. Thank you for watching.